On the battlefield, he was feared as the Heavenly Demon, a man who shattered sects, crushed masters, and left rivers of blood in his wake. But even legends fall, and Zhang Qian met his end at the hands of the 9 great sects. Yet death was not the end. When he opens his eyes, he's no longer the demon everyone feared, but Hua Mujin, the weakest heir of a ruined clan, mocked as a madman with no strength and no future. Debts choke his family, enemies circle like vultures, and a deadly duel waits just weeks away. In this fragile body, even lifting a blade is agony. But the will of the Heavenly Demon does not break so easily. Whispers of his past name spread in the shadows. Old enemies sharpen their blades, certain that history could never repeat itself. But history does not repeat, it evolves. And this time, vengeance has a new face. Now, with only scraps of time, he must rebuild himself from nothing. Every breath is pain, every swing a struggle, but each step pulls him closer to awakening the monster the martial world thought was gone forever. They buried the Heavenly Demon once. This time, he rises from the weakest body to shatter the world again. From a vantage point high above, the ruined battlefield stretches out below, littered with innumerable fallen soldiers among jagged rocks. Amidst this grim spectacle, a lone figure stands at the edge, silently surveying the aftermath of the brutal conflict. Amid the turmoil, 3 renowned warriors come together. Abbot who leads the Mount sect, and the head of the clan. Observing their adversary's utter fatigue, they silently recognize that this moment presents the perfect chance to defeat him. The adversary, distinguished by her flowing dark hair and piercing red eyes, shifted her gaze toward the group, and with a chilling demeanor, declared that they were the last ones left. The trio of leaders themselves for the confrontation, while Jin raised his voice, urging his companions to get ready for the impending fight. The adversary, eyes glowing crimson, rushed at them with unrestrained aggression. Jin successfully deflected the opponent's strike, yet the sheer power behind the blow forced him to stumble backward. The abbot Jin becomes furious and angrily refers to him as a cursed heavenly demon. The character then releases the powerful Thousand Buddha Palm technique. The heavenly demon deftly, the incoming strike. He announced his intention to be the first to end the other man's life. Jin Chun urgently begged his fellow soldiers to quit standing by and come to his aid immediately, and hurried to support their friend, who was struggling to protect himself from the relentless strikes of the heavenly demon. Both fighters responded with their signature moves. One struck with the dazzling plum blossom flash, while the other countered with the formidable 10,000 thunders returned to one. They rushed at him, their actions revealing a deadly purpose. The group succeeded in dealing heavy injuries to the heavenly demon. The abbot steps out from behind the heavenly demon. He struck again, silently hoping that his adversary would find tranquility in the life to come. The heavenly demon moved with expert precision, easily avoiding the oncoming strike. He unleashes his demonic power, tearing the spine from his opponent's body and ending their life instantly. The abbot collapsed to the ground, his body motionless, while his companions stood rooted in disbelief and horror. The celestial demon emerged triumphant, gripping the abbot's severed head as proof of his conquest. He declared the abbot's demise and warned that another opponent would soon face him. The rest of the challengers regarded him with fear, whispering among themselves that he was a monster. The heavenly demon attacked with sudden force, prompting to rely on his unique technique to swiftly pull back. Without hesitation, he signaled to his companion, urging a quick escape from the danger. The heavenly demon lunged toward, who raised his arms in an attempt to defend himself from the assault. The true identity of the warrior was uncovered, known as the heavenly demon. He was known as the man responsible for covering the central plains in bloodshed. All the top masters from the 9 great sects assembled, drawn together to challenge his unrivaled martial skill, which was said to surpass anyone else in the world. Yet this partnership teetered on the edge of collapse. During a different moment in the fight, the heavenly demon taunted, sarcastically suggesting that he must have already picked out a place to be buried. He sneered as he explained that he was referring to his rival's grave, not his own. Amidst the chaos of the fight, released his special move, Rain of 10,000 Flowers. In the midst of the chaos, the heavenly demon holds his sword firmly, his determined gaze revealing his unwavering belief that the battle is far from finished. A brief recollection of a tranquil time, spent beneath a blooming tree, suddenly surfaces in his thoughts. The heavenly demon convinces himself that this is not the moment for his life to end. Summoning the sword's fifth demonic form, the wielder unleashed a powerful assault called the Black Demon Dragon Strike. Suffered a fatal injury from the attack, collapsing to the ground after letting out one last scream before dying. At the instant his life ended, used the heavenly demon's own strike to launch a surprise counterattack. Known as Transcendent Supremacy, this technique enveloped the heavenly demon in a flurry of rapid, razor-sharp attacks. The heavenly demon acknowledged the sting of the attack, referring to as a sneaky rat. He ridiculed, claiming the hit felt like nothing more than a light tickle, leaving shocked. The heavenly demon responds by launching a powerful and aggressive counterstrike. A sharp blow sliced through his fingers and left a deep gash across his face. Let out a piercing scream, unable to contain the pain. During his last breaths, let loose a torrent of rage against, hurling insults and accusing him of being nothing more than a servant to the demonic cult. Chose to rely on his exceptional quickness. The character shifted swiftly from spot to spot, aiming to bewilder the heavenly demon with unpredictable movements. He suddenly appeared behind the heavenly demon, and with nothing left to lose, unleashed his final, frantic assault. He screamed as loudly as he could, desperately wishing for the heavenly demon's end. He proclaimed that his miserable existence would finally come to an end, as he drove his sword into the man's back. At that pivotal instant, vividly recalls the image of a woman and two children carrying lanterns. He quietly declared to himself that everything finally made sense, and believed the moment had come to bring things to a close. The heavenly demon raised his voice, echoing his proclamation that the final moment had arrived, and the long-standing conflict would finally cease. The heavenly demon drove his blade deep into his own chest. The blade drove straight through the heavenly demon, emerging from his back and embedding itself deep into his chest. Despite its attack driving a weapon through his heart, the heavenly demon did not fall but continued to stand firm. The heavenly demon spun around and swiftly severed its head from his shoulders. Stared in horror, unable to comprehend how his adversary remained standing despite suffering a seemingly deadly injury. He comes to the understanding that he has genuinely gone beyond the boundaries of human capability. With his final breath, murmurs in terror, coming to the dreadful understanding that this creature is more than a mere demon. It is the divine demon itself. With those final moments, Nam's life came to a close as well. Following the destruction of the 9 powerful sects by his own actions, the heavenly demon collapsed, mortally wounded, on the barren remains of the battlefield. As his life faded away, he softly uttered the names and they questioned whether their actions satisfied their desire for revenge. His mind wandered back to earlier days, remembering how his adventure first began during a heated fight. In that clash, he deftly held his ground, even as those he battled hurled insults at him, mocking his self-assurance and labeling him as conceited. He recalls the moment when his young master's face appeared before him once more. He understood that this moment marked the beginning of his journey. Before that turning point, he had only known a life filled with minor struggles just to get by. He roamed endlessly, relying on his lone blade for survival. Taking lives became necessary if he wanted to witness another sunrise. Caught in a never-ending loop of senseless violence, he began to doubt whether life held any true purpose. Everything changed the moment he encountered. She explained to him that she could relate to his pain, likening it to the constant arguments she faced in the marketplace, the difficulties she encountered at her job, and the chaos of looking after her troublesome younger siblings. Despite everything, she confessed that her siblings brought her the most joy, and after the loss of her parents nearly broke her spirit, they gave her a new purpose to keep going. She encouraged him to search for a purpose that would give his life meaning. Tears streamed down his face, while he recalls how deeply he wished to share his life with them. Those who had offered him, a person whose existence had been defined solely by violence, a newfound purpose to keep living. After their loss, he reclaimed his sword, driven by a thirst for vengeance. He considers his existence to be rootless, moving aimlessly from one location to another. The heavenly demon, his tone laced with bitterness, challenged the notion that a life like this could hold any real meaning. During his last breaths, he understood that the purpose he had desperately sought had always been by their side. For 15 long years, he traveled a solitary road marked by violence. Over time, his sword lost its sharpness, and his body became a map of numerous scars. At last, after giving up all that he possessed, he managed to fulfill his quest for vengeance. While watched the final sunrise of his life, his grip loosened and the sword fell from his hand, marking the place where the legendary divine demon would rest. Without warning, he became aware as a sharp, jarring sound pulled him from unconsciousness. He began to question whether he had somehow landed in hell. A woman's voice reached him as she proposed that her son should be taught the hidden techniques of the Yum clan, since her elder brother, who was meant to inherit them, was unable to continue martial arts after suffering a tragic mishap. Comes to the realization that he is not in hell, leaving him confused and questioning the true nature of his situation. A determined young boy rose to his feet, protesting passionately. He argued that his older brother was alive and in good health, firmly declaring that their family's secret techniques should never be taught to outsiders. A different girl insisted that their grandfather's skills were meant solely for members of the Yum clan. She pointed out that, regardless of her brother's inability to train, the woman in question was not even related to them through their mother's side. Stared at the children, his eye emitting a faint glow, as confusion washed over him in the midst of this bizarre scene. Upon discovering that he inhabits another person's body, responds with a mocking smile. Meanwhile, the man standing before him observes that their conversation is unlikely to lead to any consensus, and chooses to offer a proposal instead. The man, aware that the siblings struggle daily to find enough food, proposes a wager involving money. Now possessed by, risked every hidden technique of the clan in a high-stakes duel. The stakes were high, as the victor would claim everything. He then turned to the group, seeking their thoughts on his proposal. The boy quickly protested, his mind racing with worry about how anyone could expect them to face such a challenge when his brother hadn't begun training because of his unstable condition. At the same time, the girl recognized the offer as an obvious deception, one that even a child would notice. Growing weary of the ongoing dispute, turns her attention to the two children and inquires about the identity of. He then announced with certainty that he was the divine demon. Both children stood there, completely confused by what had just happened. The woman reacts to his confession with a mocking tone, once more questioning who he is. In response, he asserts that he is the person widely known as the divine demon. The merchant guild's second son let out a laugh at the statement, but his amusement quickly faded. He found the claim so absurd that he could only respond with a sarcastic remark, joking that the speaker might as well say he was King Yama himself. At the same time, the two children observe that their brother's health is declining. The woman moved ahead and explained that Fitz's madness, a mental condition marked by loud outbursts and uncontrollable screams, had been growing more severe. Boo, the leader of the merchant guild, observed that the family's future was already determined now that their oldest son was in such a condition. She explained to the children that she was sharing this because they were all connected by family, and hinted that the situation could also benefit them. Decided that further discussion was unnecessary, interpreting their quiet acceptance as consent to proceed with the duel. She scheduled the duel to take place on the 5th day of the following month at the Flying Shadow Pavilion. Acknowledges that it is an agreement shared among fighters. Before departing, a warning is issued to the divine demon, reminding her of the repercussions she would face if she violated the agreement. Once they departed, the young girl, filled with concern, looked to her brother for answers about their next steps, pointing out that he had never actually used a sword the right way before. Overhears her words and wonders aloud whether she is referring to him. Couldn't help but be entertained by the thought that he had never wielded a sword before, so he concentrated on drawing all his internal energy together at once. The realization struck them unexpectedly, as they found that nothing was there at all. He became increasingly terrified as he discovered that his new body was incredibly frail, with delicate muscles and brittle bones that were too feeble to support the weight of a sword. Caught in disbelief, The young girl raised her voice, desperately pleading for him to halt his actions. A young girl moved closer to the man, pleading desperately for him to regain his composure despite his apparent madness. No rational individual would remain motionless while grasping such an object. Her brother scolded her, labeling her words as foolish and demanding that she apologize at once for disrespecting him, yet she stood her ground and held back her tears. As she sprinted off, she yelled back, blaming him for the death of their parents. Observes the girl sprinting away from her. The boy explained that his sister frequently behaved this way and requested that he be patient with her. He politely excused himself and exited the room afterward. Now by himself, feels confused about why the children treat him as if he is insane, and he cannot help but think the entire situation is bizarre. He had a vivid recollection of the moment he severed the head of the clan's leader. He continued to experience the same breathless agony that had overwhelmed him when the blade had driven through his chest. He had avenged and her siblings, finally bringing closure to their suffering. He should have been able to rest with his eyes closed, but instead, he awoke in an unfamiliar body, puzzled by the strange change that had occurred. Caught in a whirlwind of uncertainty, he tried to understand how he had awakened once more within this unfamiliar form. The person found themselves curious about who the two children were, especially since they looked so much like End. She dismisses the accusation of madness, insisting that such a claim is absurd. Without warning, a man hurried over to him, addressing him respectfully as young master, and chastising him for venturing outside despite his weak condition. The man in question reveals the depth of his concern for the other person. Wondered aloud about the stranger's identity, observing that the man appeared to be quite familiar with him. Believed it was just another episode of irrational behavior, and clarified his role as a servant working for the family. Recalled how, in the past, the young man's remarkable skill in martial arts and his sharp intellect had drawn the attention of many sects, all eager to accept him as their disciple. He goes on to introduce himself as the 23-year-old successor of the Yum family, and notes that this marks the 6,205th occasion he has clarified this information to him. Questioned the truth behind his companion's claims, puzzled by how he could appear so impressive when his own, the center of his internal energy, was so weak. He also struggled to understand why those around him acted as if he had lost his sanity. Pauses for a moment, uncertainty flickering in his eyes, before revealing that everything began 17 years earlier. In a memory from earlier days, a straightforward duel took place, with neither side relying on hidden powers. At just 6 years old, stepped forward to test his skills against who was 3 years his senior. Although initially dismissed the challenge with a mocking laugh, he eventually consented to the match. Admits that he is unsure about who initiated the challenge. Without any adults around, the boys began to argue and clash with each other. In the midst of the intense battle, watched in awe as skillfully defended against every move he made. The thought crossed their mind, making them question whether this was the very ability that the virtuous side so deeply desired. Sarcastically echoed the rules of the duel, highlighting the idea of an honest fight using only their fists. Hearing this, his confusion was clear as he questioned the sudden mention of these rules. Without warning, hurled an insult at him, calling him a foolish brat, and then unleashed his attack, channeling his internal force into the blow. Was sent sprawling to the ground. Questioned his rival, whom he still addressed as brother, about his choice to use the 7-wound fist technique, reminding him that they had both promised not to rely on internal force. Let out a scoff, clearly amused that he was still being addressed as brother given the circumstances. She explained to him that the technique used was unmistakably the 7-wound fist from the Gong Dong sect, warning that its lingering effects were notoriously severe. Went on bragging, sharing with that he had been practicing the 7-wound fist lately. He recounted how, only a week ago, he had used the technique on another disciple who had acted too proud. The disciple remained close to death, his condition unchanged even at that moment. He inquired about his well-being, all the while striking him repeatedly with blows fueled by his inner strength. At last, realizes the reason behind being regarded as insane, and he considers it reasonable if these reactions are caused by the lingering effects of the seven-wound fist. He seethed with rage as he recalled how had ruined his internal energy and damaged his Dan, leaving him on the brink of madness. Despite this, had the audacity to openly challenge him to a duel, wagering the whole inheritance of the Yum family. Turned to the servant, wanting to know how they had handled that troublemaker in the past. Responded by explaining that the choice had been made by his father, the previous leader of the clan. Went on to clarify that held the dual status of being the previous clan leader's nephew, as well as the young master representing the merchant guild. The guild, recognized as one of the top 10 in the Central Plains, held a prestigious reputation. Because of this status, faced nothing more than a light reprimand before the matter was dismissed. Feels a wave of revulsion at the thought that the father only reprimanded the person responsible for his son's disability. He goes on to characterize the family as pitiful, then wonders aloud what eventually happened to those parents. Informed him that insanity was intensifying with each passing day. His father had accumulated significant debts in an effort to find a cure for his illness. 9 years earlier, the woman's condition grew more severe and eventually claimed her life. After another 3 years, the clan leader, weighed down by financial troubles, also met his end. Remembered the murmurs that followed his parents' passing. People gossiped quietly, blaming his upbringing and suggesting his parents had endured hardship because of him until their final days. Seemed like a child who had consumed everything his parents left behind, with nothing remaining except his unfortunate younger siblings, and now the family's once respected name was utterly ruined. Finishes telling his tale, explaining that the only things remaining of the Yum family are the debts from medical treatments, 2 loyal servants, and around 12 warriors. He was joined at last by his younger siblings, and, at that moment, realized the reason behind the little girl's anger and her harsh accusation that her brother was to blame for their parents' demise. A single disease had torn the whole family apart. Connects all the clues in his mind, aided by the historical knowledge he gained while reading the books found in his room. Known as the Divine Demon, acknowledged his own death following the fierce clash with the 9 major sects, and realized that 3 decades had gone by since that fateful event. He realizes through his own sensations that this world is real, and soon understands that he now lives as Mujin, the eldest son of the Yum family, a man known for his madness and complete lack of inner strength. With all those he was meant to eliminate already gone, he felt neither remorse nor any lingering ties to the life he once knew. He notices pictures his younger siblings made, each one filled with their hopes for him to get well soon. He considers their unfortunate destiny, which brings to mind memories of the other children he knew in his previous life. He makes up his mind to assist the 2 children, reasoning that, since he is now in this body, offering them even a small amount of help is the least he can do. Realizes that his main challenge lies in overcoming the powerful merchant guild. Since they were responsible for abandoning this body in such a pitiful condition, his initial objective became getting ready to face in a duel. He needed to achieve at least the beginner level in martial arts by that time. Reflected on his circumstances, coming to the conclusion that he needed to rebuild his life entirely. This brings back memories of when he first started to study martial arts. Even drawing a single breath had become a challenge. He started to focus on collecting energy, grateful for the natural abilities that the body's previous owner possessed. He found that simply shutting his eyes allowed him to connect, without any effort to sense energy at all. Energy gathered and intensified within his body. Without warning, he loses consciousness and falls to the ground. And 2 of the family's elders hurried over to him, their faces filled with concern as they tried to understand what was happening to him. After examining him, one of the men announced loudly that young master had finally passed away. Despite his uncertainty, he feels for his pulse once more and discovers that not only is he still alive, but his heartbeat is even stronger and steadier than it was previously. This situation leaves him dissatisfied, and he finds himself puzzled by the reasons behind his improved health. As slowly awakened, he turned to the elderly man, seeking answers about the mystery behind his own body. He recounted the overwhelming agony he had endured when attempting to cultivate his internal energy, known as and expressed his confusion and desperation to understand what was happening to him. One person explained to him that his body was unique, possessing a rare constitution. They shared that a renowned monk had once called it the pure heavenly martial body. Felt a surge of shock upon hearing the name, while the elder went on to explain that it belonged to a legendary hero, selected by fate to pursue justice. The elder found this amusing, but grew irritated by the remark. Clarified that the main issue lay in the body's natural alignment. A constitution filled with pure righteous energy was fundamentally incompatible with demonic arts. If someone born with such purity attempted to practice these forbidden techniques, they would experience unbearable agony and could even lose their life. Sank into hopelessness as he reflected on the various divine bodies that existed, questioning why fate had chosen to burden him with this specific one among all the possible gifts from the heavens. He suddenly understands the seriousness of his situation, knowing there are just 2 months left before the duel. Later, he inquires of his servant regarding who the 2 elderly men are. Informs him that one is the leader of the family and the other is Elder Joe. Recalled the worried looks on their faces as he fell, remembering how they discussed his declining health and urged each other to brace themselves for the worst possible outcome. He becomes aware that they do not mean well. He silently vows that he will survive. Following the event, informed him that he had been confined to his bed for 3 entire days. Reeled in disbelief at how long he had been unconscious, his mind racing with the fear that his afflicted body might claim his life before he ever had the chance to face his opponent. He instructed to lower his voice, complaining that the noise was worsening his headache, and then informed him that a sword would be necessary for the upcoming duel. He instructs the man to leave at once and arrange for swords to be crafted for him. Appeared puzzled and pointed out that they needed to focus on finding food for their next meal, questioning how they could possibly afford to purchase swords. Could hardly believe the family's complete lack of funds. Went on to clarify that, at the moment, they were relying on borrowed money from a peculiar group known as Sroom. Due to the extremely high interest rates, they found themselves overwhelmed by a huge amount of debt. Realized that the clan had truly fallen from grace, and he decided that addressing their financial troubles would have to be his first priority. An idea suddenly struck him, and he looked at with an air of false confidence, wondering aloud if taking on even more debt really mattered when they were already overwhelmed by what they owed. The servant reacted with visible surprise when the suggestion of taking on additional debt was mentioned. Despite obvious discomfort, dismissed his concerns and firmly instructed him to draft a letter addressed to the 2 elders. He informed them that he would be stepping out briefly. When receives the letter, frustration fills him upon learning that young master is visiting Sroom once more. Joe paid little attention to the situation, certain that he would be refused entry as soon as he reached the door. Worries that stirring up trouble in Sroom could prompt the faction to take action. At the same time, made their way to Bang O's office, which served as the center of operations for the moneylender. Approached the guard and requested that he inform his leader about the arrival from the clan. The guard, the request with a harsh tone, suggesting that the requester should mind his own business and gamble quietly if he didn't want to face his wrath. Demanded to meet the person in charge, causing the guard to grow irritated. Sensing the tension, stepped in and attempted to ease the mood, explaining that his young master was feeling somewhat unwell. A different man approached, curious about the source of all the noise. The guard informed the others that this newcomer was requesting an audience with the leader. At that moment, understood that the unfamiliar man was actually the person in command. Vice Leader Ma questions reason for requesting a meeting with the leader, prompting to explain that he had come seeking another loan. After hearing the news, Ma greeted the newcomer as a customer and assured him that meeting the leader was unnecessary for this particular issue. She gestures for him to come in. After stepping inside, pleaded with to leave, explaining that he had a strong sense of unease about the location. Shook his head, unwilling to turn back, and reminded everyone how far they had already traveled. Shared his anxieties, recalling a tale he once heard about an executioner from his room who had instantly killed a homeless man by slicing open his chest without hesitation. He mentions that the executioner possesses exceptional skill in the Black Hand annihilation technique. Responded with a calm disregard, questioning what difference it made. Ma informed the group that turning back was no longer an option. He signaled his soldiers to start the task. Discloses that everything had been orchestrated from the beginning. Ma clarified that striking the eldest son of the clan openly at the entrance, where everyone could see, would have been impossible. Ma looked at with a sneer, thinking to himself that's family struggled just to cover the interest, never mind the original loan. He firmly resolved not to let take advantage of him the way parents once had. Drops to his knees, pleading desperately for their mercy as he asks them to pardon his intrusion and show compassion by letting his young master live. Responded to Ma's mocking words about his family with an icy tone, stating that he had never known any parents at all. Hesitated for a brief moment as memories of his time as surfaced, but he soon pushed those thoughts aside and instructed his subordinates to start the task. Ma was instructed to order his subordinates to teach him a lesson. Moved closer to, clearly irritated and ready to teach him a lesson for his arrogance. However, before he could get close enough, a sharp pain struck, forcing a sudden scream from him. Sprang forward with agility, locking his limbs tightly around his opponent's arms and increasing the pressure of his hold. Let out a loud cry as agony shot through him when snapped his arm. In his anger, accused of being a sneaky, underhanded opponent who relied on dirty tactics. Only taunted him further, remarking that someone as big as shouldn't have such weak bones. He realized that, given his current frail condition, relying on clever strategies would serve him better than confronting his opponents head-on at this time. Ma's temper flared as he demanded an explanation from his subordinates, questioning their actions with a sharp glare. The person instructed the group to complete the task without delay. The last of the men lunged at, but she evaded their strikes with remarkable agility and expertise. One of the opponents compared to a slippery eel after he dodged their attacks. Realizing that physical strength alone would not secure his victory, decided that relying on quick head movements was his best strategy. Despite suffering a minor bruise, he skillfully brings down one of his assailants with an accurate blow. He swiftly dodged the incoming strikes from his opponent. With a powerful kick, she launched the warrior through the air. The warrior then collapsed with force, landing directly on top of the other fighter. Gazes at his young master with concern, anxiously checking to see if he is all right. Responded with composure, assuring everyone that he was completely all right. Stared in astonishment, wondering aloud how had acquired such impressive fighting abilities. Responded modestly, insisting his moves weren't formal martial arts, but rather instincts his body developed from surviving difficult days on the streets. The thought of his master having lived as a street dweller left confused, yet he couldn't deny his remarkable talent. Ma made up his mind to step in, unleashing a fierce surge of purple energy toward, and daring her to try avoiding this strike as well. Swiftly avoided the strike, his eyes catching sight of a piece of metal embedded within the attack. Looked over the few men left by his side, his gaze sharp and filled with disappointment. He considered them pathetic and unworthy, dismissing them with a wave of his hand. Announcing that their part in this was over, he declared that he alone would handle everything from this point forward. Shifted his attention to, and once again expressed his desire to meet their leader, questioning whether such a request was truly so challenging to fulfill. Ma explains that someone of his standing cannot easily have an audience with the leader. She tells him to leave immediately. As Ma swung his massive sword in an aggressive attack, deftly intercepted the blow using nothing more than a pair of chopsticks, leaving Ma utterly astonished. Clarified that, lacking a sword, he had brought an alternative instead, pointing out how practical such substitutes could be. Found the martial art just as strange as he had been told it would be. Ma notices a chance to strike and prepares to make his move. Intercepted the sword using her chopsticks, and in the same swift motion, she seized the opportunity to move forward and deliver a strike. Ma insulted him, comparing his evasive moves to those of a wretched rat, frustrated by the constant dodging of his attacks. Cautioned him about the consequences he would face if he underestimated the chopsticks. He would begin to cough up blood. Moved with impressive speed, striking Ma so forcefully that Ma cried out in agony. Ma stared in shock, unable to comprehend how someone considered mad and lacking inner strength could achieve such remarkable skill. He questioned whether this person was truly the he once knew. Struck the last blow, then revealed that he had learned his family was overwhelmed by debt and wanted to find out what sort of people their lenders were. With Ma firmly subdued, taunted him, expressing disbelief that someone with such poor abilities could have ever succeeded in swindling money from others. Ma's temper flared, and he resolved to demonstrate the power of the martial arts that had been so easily dismissed. The character announced that the time for games had come to an end. Found himself puzzled, trying to recall any moment he had looked down on them. Meanwhile, Ma unleashed his hidden skill, the infamous Black Hand annihilation art of the twin Celestial Moon massacre. Responded by insisting that it was the others who had been participating, not himself. Swiftly evades the incoming strike without any difficulty. The sight of left everyone stunned. He questioned in his mind the reason behind concealing such extraordinary strength for so long. Once emerged victorious over Ma cautioned him, insisting that was unaware of the repercussions his choices would bring. Paid no attention to his warnings, making it clear that he wasn't there to hear the man's opinions. Instead, he explained that giving honest answers would be the key to surviving longer. He calmly restated what he had said before, once again requesting to borrow additional money. In a different scene, seemed to be thoroughly entertained by the events unfolding around him. He reflected inwardly, realizing that it had been quite some time since he had experienced such enjoyment. Ma's followers sat bound, unable to move, as Ma urgently attempted to prevent from consuming a suspicious drink, cautioning him that it could seriously harm his health. Turned to Ma, her curiosity evident as she wondered aloud why someone as careful with money as he would choose to back the clan without securing any guarantee. Suggests that some form of corruption is likely involved. Ma insisted that he meant no harm, yet merely laughed in disbelief, remarking that he could practically hear the schemes forming in his mind. Reached for a handful of dice and held them up menacingly, making it clear that he would force the other person to swallow 30 of them if he did not cooperate. He would find himself unable to say a word, no matter how much he wished to. Feeling the pressure of intimidation, Ma admitted that the Merchant Guild orchestrated the entire scheme. Unsurprised by this revelation, mentally likened the guild to vermin and pressed Ma to reveal the specifics of their agreement. Ma pauses uncertainly, pointed out that he was neither a monk nor a warrior tied to codes of honor, insisting that his loyalty belonged with his own men rather than the guild. They would remain indifferent, even if he were torn apart and the entire building went up in flames. Ma, unable to hold back any longer, confesses the truth about a hidden agreement. The guild instructed that the clan be given loans of any size they requested, but at extremely high interest rates, hoping this would trap the clan in overwhelming debt they could never repay. In exchange, they were assured that after the clan fell, they would receive its territory along with a generous reward. Came to the sudden understanding that the clan's land had secretly been used as collateral. Curious about the future worth of his loan, he inquired about how much the 300 he was borrowing would amount to after a year. In response, Ma explained that, according to their agreement, the debt would swell to nearly 5,000 by that time. Let out a laugh, thinking to herself that they were nothing but a bunch of fools, before turning her attention back to the paperwork in front of her. At last, inquires about who is supporting Sroom from behind the scenes. Ma discloses that their group is called the Faction, which is a part of the unorthodox alliance named. Reflected on the name, considering them to be nothing more than despicable lowlifes. Caught off guard by his familiarity with, questioned him about it. However, brushed off the inquiry, insisting that taking the time to explain would be pointless. Rather than waiting quietly, he grows restless and demands to know the reason for the delay, wanting to find out why the person holding his money has not arrived yet. A short while later, someone arrives carrying a box overflowing with cash. The man shows the item to the group and announces that it costs 300. Carefully examines the gold coins, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction as he determines that the sum is sufficient. He instructed to grab the money and be quiet so they could go, but hesitated, still uneasy about borrowing the cash. As they prepared to leave, instructed the moneylenders to carefully document the debt in their official records. He goes on to warn them that once he has finished dealing with their associates at the Merchant Guild, he will return to reclaim every last coin owed to him. He observes how they are exploiting the common folk to exhaustion and cautions them that dire consequences await if they go too far. Their fear compels them to nod in reluctant agreement. As Ma walked away, he grumbled under his breath, insulting the young master's sanity and promising himself that time would reveal which of them would falter before the other. When they arrived back at the clan, spotted some blood and grew concerned. Quickly reassured him, explaining that the blood did not belong to him. Stood frozen, clearly unsettled by the recent events in his room. While unfazed, explained in a composed manner that all he had done was borrow some money, nothing beyond that. He pointed out the importance of nourishing the clan's warriors, emphasizing that losing any more fighters was not an option. The elder questioned whether he had taken the money, pointing out that Bang O's room was unlikely to lend him any. In response, assured the elder that he had requested for the debt to be officially recorded in the account books. He instructs the older Joe Bong to focus solely on providing food and clothing for his younger siblings. As walked away, the two elders observed him in silence, their minds filled with uncertainty about whether such madness could genuinely exist in the world. Later stood in front of the memorial altar dedicated to his parents. He reflected silently, realizing that, because he had never truly known his parents, he was unsure of how to offer them comforting words. He comforted everyone by explaining that most of their money troubles were now behind them. From that point forward, he promised to look after his siblings and everyone living in the house, urging them to relax and not worry anymore. He went on to mention the upcoming duel he had scheduled with, explaining that he was risking the clan's secret manual as his wager. He assures his parents that he will take action on their behalf, vowing to deal with their enemies himself. In a subsequent scene, the warriors of the clan voiced their fatigue, expressing how tired they felt. Assigned the responsibility of relocating extremely heavy boxes. Entered the room and opened the boxes, showing the group a set of training swords that were shockingly heavy, weighing 30, 48, and 66 kilograms each. The person checks to make sure everyone is present. Questioned his decision to request items that proved so difficult for the warriors to transport, and responded by questioning the obvious purpose of a sword, implying there was no other use for it. He then clarified his point by stating that a sword is meant to be swung. He chooses to begin with the sword that weighs 30 kilograms, since it is the among them. When he attempts to pick it up, he finds himself straining, only managing to shift it slightly. Watches in disbelief, surprised that he would even try to wield an object of such weight. His frustration grew as he realized that, despite anticipating such an outcome, he was unable to lift even 30 kilograms. Disheartened, he silently blamed his uncooperative body for his weakness. Persisted in his efforts to raise the weighty sword, silently convincing himself that surrender was not an option at this moment. Summoning every ounce of strength, he grasps the object with both hands and struggles to raise it just above the ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps from the effort. He instructed to stop looking at him and to carry out the task he had assigned. He decided that from now on, he would include meat in his meals. With the days slipping away, just 15 were left before the duel would take place. Comes to the startling understanding that his body now holds the orthodox heavenly constitution, a power entirely unlike the demonic arts his master once taught him. With no other options available, he is left to focus on perfecting the 9 swords of solitude, an ancient skill passed down to him from his master's sworn brother. He believes this is his sole chance to stay alive. At the same time, heard about the incident and found it hard to believe that had managed to defeat the Bang Gang. Subordinate brought confirmation of the news, mentioning that their team would be unable to operate for the next 2 weeks. then began to question what kind of ability might have used, especially since did not possess any internal energy. He offered a sardonic smile, inwardly noting that a purebred always stays true to its nature. They conclude that it is necessary to get a present ready for young master. He eagerly anticipates the upcoming duel, curious to witness all the clever tactics might reveal. The focus shifted back to, who was deeply immersed in intense training. Pushed himself through grueling training, throwing punch after punch and kick after kick, his resolve unwavering as he worked to perfect his martial arts skills. He believes that anyone blessed with a body from the heavens should be able to withstand trials like these. Upon noticing that had arranged all the requested items, he announces that the true training is about to start. He started to train with the initial stance of the 9 swords of solitude, focusing on the blade of advancement technique. The concept centered around relentless progress, pushing ahead with such determination that even the formidable Mount Tai would not dare to obstruct its path. He transitions into the second form, unleashing the blade technique that breaks through conventional styles. The core purpose of this ability was to break apart any weapon that challenged it. The grueling training begins to wear down his fragile body. Despite everything, he remains determined to persevere. He launches the ball with such force that it bounces rapidly around the space, moving at an astonishing speed. He then began to perform the third technique, known as the heaven-slicing blade. The core idea behind this technique was that no matter how powerful the enemy's strike, even if it seemed strong enough to shatter the sky, the blade would always cleave the attack in two before it could reach its target. He struggled to catch his breath, his body drenched in sweat. A sudden, stabbing sensation shoots through his back. Despite his exhaustion, he shouted insistently, insisting that they proceed to the next technique, his resolve unwavering as he pushed himself to keep training no matter what it took. Persisted with his rigorous training routine. The focus shifted to the fourth technique among the 9 swords of solitude, the formidable blade of disassembly. The core idea behind the sword was that no knee could endure its strike. Even the most intricate works of art possess flaws, making them vulnerable to being destroyed by the most unremarkable of blades. He missed every single target. During his practice sessions, he grows increasingly annoyed as he struggles to slice through the descending logs. The character then transitioned to the 5th form, expertly wielding the army-slicing blade. The idea centers around the belief that, no matter how many foes surround him, all who stand in the sword's presence will be brought to their knees. Numbers held no significance when faced with genuine power. He pushed through the exhausting training, yet a log struck him squarely on the head. He raised his voice, his frustration clear, as he insisted on advancing to the next stage. He trained in the 6th sword technique, known as the blade that divides the moon, focusing on slicing through candles without putting out their flames. He believed that this sword was so powerful, it could even cleave the moon itself. He practiced the 7th form, a sword technique known for splitting the ground itself. Believing that the earth would part to allow his blade through, he understood that after such a cut, the size of the obstacle no longer mattered. Found himself puzzled by the resilience of his own body, amazed that it remained unharmed after everything he had just endured. He advances to the 8th form, known as the heaven-shattering blade, embracing the belief that even the skies would yield to its power, and that no object in existence could withstand its edge. At last he attains the 9th and ultimate form, the blade of final severance. This technique carries the belief that once a person has severed both themselves and their weapon, there remains no purpose in continuing to wield a sword. Thought back over his training sessions, questioning whether his actions amounted to little more than copying others without understanding. He recalls a time long ago, reliving his master's lessons on the last technique. In his recollection, he questioned the worth of the skill, criticizing it as unfinished and pondering why it should be recognized as a true sword art. He thought the way the forms were described was over the top and immature, as if someone were slicing apart the world, the heavens, and their own being. His new master did not reject the idea, but he questioned whether his friend's legacy ought to conclude in such a manner. Believing he himself was unable to continue the tradition, he urged to take up the responsibility instead. He disclosed that the artist behind this work was the sole swordsman capable of rivaling his own skills. The master clarified that the person behind this artwork lacked inner power and likely relied on a basic martial technique focused on developing strength through bodily exercises. Attempted to mock the martial arts name, yet the master responded by tapping him sharply on the forehead. At that moment, realization dawned on the young. The master went on to explain that if someone practiced the sword movements 1,000 times, their body would begin to transform. Repeating the action 100,000 times would grant him a powerful sword aura, while reaching 1,000,000 repetitions would render him unbeatable anywhere. Recalled the moment he questioned his master about whether the artist's creator was truly his equal. His master had admitted he couldn't say for certain, but warned that if they ever clashed, only one would survive. At that moment, reflected on the artist responsible for this captivating work. Filled with concern, attempts to rouse him by gently slapping his cheek. Once revived him from his faint, he showed clear worry over how long it took for him to regain consciousness. In response, with a playful tone, warned that if tried to wake him by hitting him again, there would be consequences. Puzzled over how he had collapsed from exhaustion after only completing a single routine, realizing that he still had much to improve. Noticing the time, pointed out that it was late and recommended that get something to eat. As sat down to eat, she noticed pork on her plate and could not hide her astonishment. Brought up the fact that the other person had chosen a meat dish just the day before, urging him to savor it since it had been so long since they last had meat together. Starting the next day, instructed that beef should be included in their meals, mentioning its benefits for muscle growth. This unexpected decision left completely stunned. Reassured him that there was no need to be concerned about the money, and encouraged him to make use of what they had borrowed. He firmly stated his intention to eat only meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner each day leading up to the duel. Wondered aloud to his young master about the length of time he had spent practicing martial arts, but instead of giving a direct answer, replied by questioning whether found it unusual. Acknowledged the oddity, noting how unusual it was for someone who had never behaved like an ordinary person to abruptly begin training in martial arts. Remarked on the incredible feat, noting how the boy had overcome all the members of his room using just a single chopstick, and now he was beginning to master a fearsome sword technique. Began to playfully insist that he was not, but rather the divine demon. Before he could continue, Ma cut him off, urging him to quit making such ridiculous statements. Reveals his true worry, admitting that he is afraid, could suffer another memory loss and change into someone unrecognizable. There was always a lingering fear in her mind that one day he could simply vanish without a trace. He nervously wonders aloud if the other man intends to leave the Yum clan behind. Offered comforting words, vowing to remain with the clan until it rose to become the most powerful martial family in all of Sichuan. Stands speechless, overwhelmed by the enormity of the ambition before him. Brought her hand down and struck him on the head. She orders him to go away. Believes that reaching this objective would honor the wishes of the true. At the same time, the two older figures talked about the upcoming duel, which was set to happen in 10 days. Believes that is determined to eliminate young master and claim the Flame Emperor's inheritance for himself. Zhou Bong proposes that they should leave before that moment arrives. They insisted that the safety of the last 2 family members must be protected at all costs. Pressed on with his grueling training regimen. Through daily practice with his sword, he had at last managed to develop some strength in his arms. He could now wield a 66-kilogram iron sword effortlessly in one hand, yet he remained puzzled about why his technique with the blade lacked stability. A week remained before the duel was set to take place. During his training, he receives a visit from his 2 younger siblings. He tells the group to find a safer place to play, concerned for their safety, but they explain that they have been observing him push himself too hard lately and are worried about his well-being. So questioned her brother, wondering if his actions were a result of her earlier accusation that he was responsible for their parents' deaths. She went on to confess that she only said those harsh words out of anger. Let out a sigh, his thoughts drifting to memories of the two children before him, which always led him to recall the other youngsters he had known in his previous life. After calming his siblings' worries, he let them know that he was all right. The younger brother watched with admiration as he observed the fighting stance. Inspired, he attempted to copy the pose himself. Meanwhile, their sister noticed his efforts and stepped in to adjust his position, pointing out that their brother's arms had been stretched out farther. Observed the group with a gentle smile, feeling a sense of affection as he noticed how adorably they tried to copy his actions. The scene brought back a distant recollection for him, reminding him of the days he spent training alongside his master in a former life. He recalls the way his master taught him the vital breathing method for the Go sword style, releasing a deep breath as the sword moves, then pausing without haste. At the end, as the person settled back into the ready stance, they drew in a slow, short breath. Came to understand that what truly mattered about the Go sword was not its shining blade, but the unique breathing method of the disciples that gave the sword its true power. Comes to the realization, in the present moment, that he had neglected to remember these important teachings from his master. He offered comforting words to his siblings once more, vowing to emerge victorious in the duel regardless of the sacrifice. After making this promise, he instructed them to go back to their room. Once they had gone, concern filled their thoughts as they questioned whether things were truly okay. Resumed his training, incorporating the breathing method he recalled, a slow, deliberate release of air. The character gripped tightly, choosing patience over haste. He took a short breath while rehearsing the fifth form, known as the slaughter form. He concentrates on channeling every bit of energy stored within him, preparing to unleash it all at once in one powerful blow. She manages to carry out the plan flawlessly. It was revealed that, also known as moving meditation, was a form of qigong that focused on increasing internal energy by using physical motions. Compared to other techniques, this one falls under the category of basic martial arts. It offered little benefit when it came to broadening the flow of energy. Contrary to his expectations, he found that learning it was easier than he had thought. The technique depended mostly on maintaining steady breaths. Notices that sword training, which once seemed challenging, now feels much easier. By matching his breath to the rhythm of each sword movement, he has slowly gained better control over his body. After countless rounds of practice, the once dispersed energy within his body, built up over many years, gradually started to gather and solidify. Later on, Joe wanted to know from whether was still keeping up with his training. Shared the remarkable progress he had witnessed, pointing out that while the young master had once been frail and prone to fainting spells, he now displayed newfound strength and seemed transformed into someone entirely unrecognizable. Believes that the progress he is experiencing is a result of the immortal chi therapy he underwent earlier. Joe remains unconvinced, silently reasoning that no medical intervention could cause someone to heal so quickly. Joe requested that inform him immediately should any emergencies arise. After agreeing to this request, quickly departed, leaving Joe behind. Walked carefully, balancing a tray of food intended for his young master. He froze in disbelief as he saw the training ground utterly demolished, and at its center stood radiating an intense energy. Arrived at the training ground and froze in shock as he took in the scene of devastation, his mind racing with questions about the cause of the chaos. Expressed her frustration, noting that the space was now too cramped for them to keep up with their training. He declares his intention to use the Grand Training Hall from that moment forward. Inside the Grand Training Hall, the clan's warriors practiced their skills with focused determination. Entered the room and drew everyone's attention to the arrival of visitors. Feeling timid, moves ahead and lets the warriors know that the young master plans to use the hall, leaving them taken aback by the announcement. Informed the group that he needed to practice by himself. Since he requires plenty of room, he decides to borrow the hall and requests that they move to a different training area close by. A warrior jeered at him, ridiculing his weakened state and questioning the sense behind his words. He points out that simply wielding a sword is not enough to be called a warrior, particularly for someone whose weapon remains untouched by blood. observed the determined expressions reflected in the warrior's gaze. He persisted in voicing his disagreement. The leader of the guards, known as stepping between the warriors, the figure commanded them to halt, making it clear that young master was simply engaged in martial arts training. The defiant fighter quietly remarked that the young master was once again showing signs of his old craziness. Stepped forward, halting the guard captain in his tracks, and faced the warrior with determination. She urged him to speak up directly, rather than mumbling under his breath like someone afraid to confront the issue. Wondered aloud, curious about the point being made. Responded by explaining that warriors resolve their conflicts through combat. The captain stepped forward once more, insisting that it was forbidden for any warrior to raise their sword against the family's heir. Responded by quoting a proverb, explaining that a real war dog remains silent, whereas only a frightened dog makes noise. He turned his attention to, daring him to stop making threats if he had no intention of fighting, and telling him to continue living in fear like a coward. His anger boiled over as he unsheathed his sword, silently promising that would come to rue his actions. Responds with an icy demeanor, making it clear that he is incapable of feeling regret. The battle commences. The warriors looked on in astonishment, as engaged in battle unarmed, relying on unfamiliar and unexpected motions instead of wielding a sword. Skillfully avoided every strike his opponent threw at him, moving effortlessly out of harm's way. The captain, growing frustrated, demanded that his opponent stop evading and confront him directly in a fair sword fight. Nodded in acceptance of the proposal. The guard captain reflected silently, realizing that a quarter of a century had passed since he first became part of the clan. While captain reflected, he blamed young master for the clan's decline, surprised that was only now beginning to mention martial arts. He shouted at, insisting that should remember his position before launching an attack against him. Countered the assault by unleashing the second technique from the 9 swords of solitude. The decisive strike was delivered, effortlessly stopping his assault. Stared in disbelief, his mind racing to understand how this method could disturb the very core of his inner strength. Acknowledged the truth in all of statements. With a swift motion, the fighter struck the guard captain's face with a forceful uppercut. Firmly declares that everything is about to be different from this point forward. Observes that his eyes now appear sharp and alert, a stark contrast to the blank expression he had before. Now a fierce resolve shone in their eyes, reflecting the unwavering determination of a seasoned warrior. At that moment, overpowered the guard captain and won the fight. Surrounded by a crowd filled with surprise, the onlookers were left questioning the method behind young master's unexpected victory. The warriors hurried over too, their faces filled with concern as they made sure he was all right. Towered above the fallen, questioning whether he still had any grievances left after his defeat. A warrior loudly protested, claiming that the battle had lacked honor. He asserted that, was incapable of confronting him earnestly. Shouted at him, demanding silence. Drops to his knees, openly conceding that he has lost. He informed that he had gained new knowledge that day, prompting to instruct him to withdraw. In response, affirmed his allegiance. Once the situation concluded, the guard captain instructed every warrior to step aside and relocate to the secondary training area, making it clear that no one was to get involved. Requested that depart, wishing to be left by himself in the grand training hall. One of the warriors, standing some distance away, questioned about his decision to retreat. However, refused to admit any wrongdoing, and maintained that he had given his opponent a genuine and earnest fight. The warrior doubted story and demanded an explanation for his actions in the duel. Taken aback by the accusation, firmly backing down, he insisted that he had never retreated, arguing that he had nearly defeated his opponent instead. Was puzzled by the drastic transformation that had overtaken, unable to grasp what could have caused such a change in him. Comes to the realization that young master has encountered a newfound chance. The servant thinks that, with the young master's recent transformation, circumstances could improve. The evening before the confrontation with the merchant guild unfolded quietly. Elders and Joe sat together, reflecting on the passage of time since they first became members of the clan. One elder wondered aloud about how many years had gone by, prompting the other to recall that nearly 37 years had passed since their induction. The first elder remembers with great affection the days when Master of Peak stood out for his remarkable achievements. Elder Joe recalled the day when Master arrived by himself and compelled the proud Tang clan to recognize his formidable martial abilities. The second elder spoke up to remind him about the promise they had made, to devote their lives to his service in repayment for the help he had once given them. Joe claims that he is on the verge of breaking his promise now, insisted that this could not be considered a betrayal, believing it was necessary for the master's bloodline and influence to endure, no matter the circumstances. For 17 long years, had devoted themselves to tending to the young master's unstable mind, all while witnessing the gradual downfall of the Yum clan. He thinks that Master would not hold them responsible, even if they saw him after death, and then he inquires whether all preparations for leaving have been completed. Acknowledges that preparations are minimal, requiring only some gold for establishing themselves in a new location, a handful of warriors and 4 command plaques. He motioned for Bong to move ahead of him, states his intention to remain, reasoning that, regardless of all that has happened, young Master is still descended from that man, and someone must tend to his well-being. He explains that the Merchant Guild has arranged for an expert to serve as a witness during the upcoming duel. Interprets this as an effort to justify their act of stealing. He understands that these wicked individuals will destroy everything, leaving not even a single blade of grass untouched. He instructed Bong to head to the designated meeting spot, thinking to himself that the 2 young children would already be startled by the situation. In another location, grumbled about the recent toughness of the meat, while explained that inexpensive beef cuts were always difficult to chew. Wondered aloud whether their funds had already been depleted, while admitted his uncertainty, explaining that the head steward hardly provided them with enough money in the first place. Questioned whether the other boy had taken the meat, but the boy insisted he would never stoop so low. Because of this, wondered aloud why the boy had recommended escaping, only to receive a slap in response. At the same time, prepared for the upcoming duel, turning to seek his thoughts on how she looked. Admits that he actually appeared more attractive when his injuries were covered by bandages. Chooses not to respond to the remark and determines that now is the right moment to leave. Just as he begins to take a step, emerges and questions whether he truly intends to leave. With a hint of sarcasm, wonders aloud if the newcomer has come to urge him to escape as well. Shook his head in denial, prompting to instruct him to stay put while he confronted the thieves, assuring that he would return swiftly after dealing with them. Is determined to accompany him. Felt bored by the situation, silently grumbling about how elders tended to fret too much. He confidently announced his intention to defeat them regardless and instructed his group to move forward.